President Trump will hold a rally in El Paso, Texas tonight as the federal government faces a second possible shutdown. Negotiations over a border security deal among congressional Democrats, Republicans, and the White House broke down over the weekend. This comes ahead of the Friday deadline to avert another shutdown. Democrats are demanding a limit on the number of undocumented immigrants ICE can detain. They want the Trump administration to prioritize people with criminal records. Republicans say the cap would hinder the agency's mission. Meanwhile, the White House has remained steadfast in its demand for $5.7 billion to fund a border wall. Right now, congressional negotiators are looking at between $1.3 and $2 billion for a border barrier, mostly for new and replacement fencing. Yahoo News White House correspondent Hunter Walker joins me now from Washington. Hunter, thanks for joining us. Remind us why this border security deal is critical in order to avert another shutdown.
Well, for President Trump, it's hugely important because one of his, as we all know, central campaign promises was this wall along the Mexican border. And even though this, $5.7 billion, and it's really important to remember this, it would only fund about 250 miles of barrier that's in line with what we have now. So that's far from the giant concrete wall Trump promised, and it's definitely not paid for by Mexico. But Trump has been trying to reframe the conversation and make this $5 billion into a fulfillment of his wall vision. So it's absolutely crucial for him. And I think, that political importance is part of why it's so important for Democrats to block it here.
Well, as the shutdown was hugely unpopular, and President Trump and the Republicans took most of the blame for that. So if a deal isn't reached, does the White House have the appetite for another shutdown? Or could the president make good on his threat to declare a national emergency?
I think both sides need to be very careful right here, as you were pointing out. The Democrats need to worry about this executive option President Trump has, where he could declare a national emergency and extract funding that way. And President Trump has to worry about how unpopular the shutdown was last time. We're not getting a lot of details out of the negotiations. They've hit this snag over detention bed caps here after what seemed to be a lot of progress over the weekend. I do think we're seeing some momentum for some other type of short-term measure and kind of continuing the pattern of lurching from CR to shutdown, CR to potential shutdown that we've seen for the past few years now. But, both sides really do need to be careful. If I'm being really cynical, I do think they kind of released a pressure valve a little bit after the last shutdown where, the last one was the longest one we've seen in U.S. history. And that started some really painful, politically toxic consequences, namely a lot of federal workers going without paychecks. But as we saw, it does take a little bit of time for the paychecks to slow down. So they did sort of reset the clock. And I think, potentially we're seeing two semi-palatable items here in either another short-term measure or, a shutdown that doesn't stretch beyond a week or two when people really start to get mad.
Well, something tells me that those workers have not been able to build up their savings in the weeks that have come between that shutdown and now. So let's talk about the emergency declaration. What are the risks that come with that?
Well, I think your point is very well taken, by the way. I mean, people should, as we sit here and talk about political consequences and optics, real lives are at stake. And a lot of people had their savings wiped out, had to give up cars, really suffered consequences there. So I don't think, we have as much of a cushion this time. The national emergency might seem very palatable to President Trump because effectively he could get his way. At the same time, I think a lot of conservatives, particularly, those of the libertarian and more small government persuasion, they repeatedly railed against President Obama for using executive powers. And this national emergency thing is even a step beyond that and almost authoritarian. So, it's uncharted waters. And I think we don't know exactly what the political consequences of that type of measure would be.
So we said the president is headed to El Paso. What is the focus of his rally tonight?
Well, the White House is framing this as a big speech on border security. And even though El Paso is not exactly the border, Texas is a border state. And I think this is a clear sign that the president is not giving up pushing for the wall and that the White House had kind of been preparing for him to move back towards, for lack of a better term, shutdown politics. I mean, something along the line, sort of the Trump rally version of the speech we saw him make a few weeks ago, where he, made the argument for the wall and made his case for the wall. This is the president sort of trying to drum up his support as potentially he does not sign off on any deal to avert a shutdown here.
All right. Yahoo News White House correspondent Hunter Walker, thanks for your insights.
Thanks for having me.